counter life as a country and western
Collar. They used to call him Caribou Paul.
Why?
No.
Our next reader, if he's ready, is Clint Burnham. Professor Clint.
Yeah.
There was a sticker on this and it fell off. What award did it win?
The
West Staff, something or other.
Yeah,
Western States.
Poetry. Yeah.
I think it was $5,000.
My ever-ending, goal of, imposing Lacanian readings on poetry, along with Maxine. Didn't I read a poem of yours called Lac La Lac? Lac La Lac. Right? You have Lac La Lash, and then you have Lac La Lac. Yeah.
But actually, it was a series of poems.
So when I was trying to elicit,
Lakes.
Brock
Oh,
Russell and I
Lac.
are trying to do a chapbook by Maxine. And quiet, Maxine, I'm talking about you. Brock Russell and I are trying to do a chapbook by Maxine, and I said this Lac La Lac, and it reminded me of that joke. The prostitute was said that she wanted to move back to her hometown outside of Buffalo, and the policeman asked her, well, why don't you go there? And she said, well, Lackawanna. Free Buffalo.
That's awful.
T as in Tether, Harbor Master of Hong Kong, and then I also have, but that I had at home, and these were in my office, my poetry, of course. I'm going to do, the danger with these references is that the young people don't get them, the old people never got them, but I'm going to do a strewed and chopped version of In His Ivory Tower, The Bourgeois Dreams of Home. You should stay, I feel threatened, in touch with your probably and have family because then had to deny it. You can experience, but since my second cousin, what you can't, got in touch again. Bear in yourself and, about the family, stay aware of, a state I feel less, whatever despicable mean, kind of traits you have, a calm, so that the individuation, excitement and less, processes thereby, that's the new brand, speed it up, we've been drinking, and evolution served, the ego can, you feel marvelous on, R, account of those, A, accomplishments, wonderful, others find, person, trivial, and that's when I think the trouble with how far you've come, this brand of ego, how much you've done, amazing, one can say, in these few years, anything, the poetry is, I have to acknowledge, in the motion, didactically thus, run the world we others, justified, suffer, that is, since it tells us, totally unfair, of the motion, a reprehensible, known in several, generalization, important contexts as partially true, and discourses, true, please, the mind, today, check the answer, the county cut our budget, applicable, he explained, $13,000 and the shit, when he had said, began to hit the fan, hysterical, he meant it, management since, descriptively and not, unionization perceives, pejoratively, the clinical staff as, he was interested, adversaries as though, in the use of language, we aren't all, that draws attention to, in this together, sink, and simultaneously, or swim, and even from its users, as if they weren't purposes as best, ancillary, strange, such as can be understood. When you think of it, Stevie Smith, how people in service was a highly occupations, teachers, intentional, therapists, counselors, poet, no doubt, will always have this about it, or army guarding them, not much, but for higher pay than, how vague, that they get who so often might with equal failed as therapists, Forsby said, or teachers, and thus of Coleridge, another elected to go into laboring vineyard. Management, I wouldn't, the predicate ought to go back to that guy if, to surprise the subject, you paid me, I'd, seeing how, blow my brains out first, that's only these type persons natural. If it can be allowed to the newspapers, that experience warrants the term having fun, of course with sentences and imperceptible or leveling decision made in with us or have early adult you purposes. Life turns out to more serious and have been the final thrilling, really. Choosing up of sides, eventually that's like the person in What We Mean, all a Gary Snyder poem. That's a revelatory I so often recall. Note, depends upon who'd signed on for, content to come 1 week and had been in existence into existence, yet subsequently bucking the content itself is, hey, all his life yet, nugatory, the preoccupation, the chief of some bimbo, doubtless, feeling of life, just as the act of one's is novelty, if only conception was, via its yard, mum and pop's rule of boredom, good time, a night. He announced that out-eye, with a definite don't care to, and characteristic disgust, the English shrug of the shoulders, are so metaphorical that was accompanied, and this is, by an extension, their tongue of hands upward and, in your literal, opened, he sensed, ear. Our friends, change was in the air, messengers from life, and I agreed that, to death, our building, I had felt as much a celestial city when, of late myself, but I enter you, perhaps it wasn't how I feel whole, entirely attributable, and how that feeling is, but apart from the sensation, referent that baffles memory, rocks, turns away, the late Bob said, like 20th century needs 4 simple markers, aspirin and a hug. See, how I always do, I believe such stuff, desire to be there, no, in such a wide span through the desire, Caesar as he planned, comes and goes, but battles, call it if you wish, crave how I crave, like an insect walking, union, yet how delay, the meniscus, I guess, same, unless is that Yeats never saw a shopping, you doing it through, list, that passionate to me, when young, old codger, who can't, grade 5 remainders, dwell in recollections, held me fascinated, of early sex and sense, disturbed, worried, his balls draw close, was I alone in that, as if to eavesdrop, we stand at the window, figuratively, embracing and speaking, like an Ingo Seidler, gold to airy thinness, translation, beat, is it? Dispersed so, of Paul Celan, finally via sublimation, they look at us, that urge repeats itself from the street, otherwise as it is time, remembers, now let's, that they knew, mention mother, the last and her displaced 4 lines are, fall, Zhukovsky also well, was right, we must, worth perusal, have what we want, though irrelevant, now and only in that, in this context, form to so enable, embracing, and ennoble us, yet hardly cuts it. Poetry about poetry, anymore, with open arms, is a drag, it's safe, it moves in on its, to say, even poets, 1 page left, writing poems about expressionism, ego, how they hate that is the foot that poets drive, write poems, drags and slows, about poetry will, the cyclist, Samson agreed, actually the emotional. I like best when someone, idiot, talks about her work affords a common, that's a sound, model, we keep fit, use of leisure, for the identity it gives to my mind. I am aware, us with our grandparents, there are some in their doctrinal, factual errors in this observances, peace, the ones that are eternal life, deliberate like, means to maximize, attributing Charles' use of what Zhukovsky's statement, Olson's statement to assume to be Zhukovsky as an allotted government's expressionist. I have this agree to kill off millions, obligation to distort, because that's the solution to outer reality and my overpopulation. So why political strategy? Not do it via gene spliced coincides with this viruses that sexually, whenever I allow a line, repress all worker ants. To stay, evoking a schizoid ant, also was hospitalized. Distortions of the social for paranoia that prompt.